There's just this natural pull that happens back to a bio family. And even though my mom kicked me out at 18 and life was not easy, I still wanted her approval. I wanted her to be proud of who I was. I wanted her to know that she was a good mom, that she did a good job raising me to the best of her ability.
It can be really easy for someone who has experienced a challenging childhood to make excuses for not becoming all that they are capable of becoming. They might slide into the behaviors that were modeled for them. To break the mold, you really have to have a fierce determination. And my guest today would say, you need God too. Author Stacey Glass shares her story of struggle, healing, restoration, and God's living power in our lives. Welcome to Lessons from Living. I'm your host, Beth Graham. Let's listen. Well, hello, Stacey. Welcome to Lessons from Living.
Thanks so much for having me, Beth. So honored to be here.
Oh, we are glad to have you. For context and thinking about your life, could you give us a picture of what kind of experience your childhood was like?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, Beth. My childhood was marked by a lot of trauma. I was raised mostly by a single mom who was in and out of dealing with drugs and alcohol most of her life until the time of her, almost up until the time of her death. My father was non-existent for many years of my life and had several stepmoms that I loved. My dad, we were either in our dad's lives if the female that he was with liked my sister and I. And if they didn't, then we weren't part of my dad's life. And just growing up was marked by a lot of unseen by my family, but seen by God and God's people.
Okay. And I know you said that you feel like you've forgotten much of your childhood, which is really common in trauma. So is it fair to say that your experience might have even been worse than you're able to remember or describe?
Oh, absolutely. And it's so interesting as probably over the last 5 or 6 years, I've done a lot of recovery work. And that is really where I have begun to remember some things from my childhood that maybe I had forgotten or things that maybe were told to me that I didn't want to come to terms with. So I'm sure my childhood was way more painful than I probably remember.
Okay. And you say that the presence of God was a constant through it all. I know people stepped up in your life to support you and made the difference in you being able to overcome your circumstances. And I'd like to just talk about some of them and the impact that they
Yeah.
had on your life. There was the family at Calvary Temple. What did they do for you?
Oh my goodness. Man, they were just the hands and feet of Jesus. My sister got invited to go to church with a friend of hers, and shortly after that, she had just decided that that church wasn't the right church for her, but I still wanted to go. And her friend's family wasn't going to that church anymore, but one of the pastors had reached out and said, "Hey, my family would love to come and pick you up." So from the time I was in third grade till the time that I graduated high school, this wonderful family picked me up Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, 3 times a week for many, many years. They had 6 children of their own. They drove 20 minutes out of their way to come pick me up, to drive back past their house to get us to church in another town. And it being an adult now, I realize, how much of a sacrifice that was, how they had to get their kids ready earlier, how they had to be out the door earlier. And as a pastor, he had to be there early anyways. But just that self-sacrifice of saying, man, this girl needs Jesus. And more than this girl needs Jesus, this girl needs people that are going to cheer for her and going to show them who I really am. Like, that's what they did. They showed me who Jesus was. They pointed me in the direction of health, of good relationships, of seeing what it was like to have healthy relationships in homes and in communities.
How about the pastor and his wife at Calvary?
Yes. Oh man, Pastor Wilson and his wife. His wife, the pastor's wife, was my missionettes leader. And I just remember walking in every Wednesday night to missionettes and her just sitting with me, her arm, around me, sitting there, talking to me to figure out and to learn just who I was, right? It wasn't just all about the Bible and all about what needed to be done. It was about, hey, how can I look at you and get to know you and love you for where you're at? Was one messed up little third grader, right? Didn't have a great family life, didn't have a mom that even wanted me to go to church. But this woman, Joanne, just wrapped her arms around me continuously. In fact, that is the pastor that married my husband and I. Not
Oh
only
my
did he
goodness.
marry us, he came and he dedicated our daughter when we had our first daughter. He had passed shortly before we had our second son, so he was not able to do his baby dedication. But I have a life marked by that pastor. And he has been
Yes.
he was in my life, not only as a kid growing up, but even after I moved away from Illinois. He came to Tennessee to do a baby dedication for our daughter and was just an amazing influence in my life.
Constant in your life for
Yep.
sure. How about the family friend who encouraged you in music?
Oh, yes. Karen. So interesting. I wanted to play the flute, and I remember the band teacher telling me that I couldn't play the flute. I mean, tell me I can't do something and I'm going to do something. I'm older now, so maybe I'm a little bit wiser and I don't take that challenge on as much. But I just remember the band director being like, "You can't play the flute. You're not good enough." And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to play the flute." Not only did I play the flute, I sat first chair all of high school. I was either first chair or I played the piccolo. But Kieran, who was the music director at Calvary, said, "Hey, would you ever be interested in doing a music competition?" Now, if you would have told me this today, I would have been like, absolutely not. I'm going to get up. I'm going to have to memorize a song. I'm going to have to play it in sync with the piano, and I'm going to get judged on it. And she and I practiced every single week. And the sweetest thing was I played El Shaddai one year. So this goes back to, late 80s, early 90s. Amy Grant was one of my favorites, still is. I actually got to meet Amy Grant several years ago and I told her that I played El Shaddai on the flute. And her comment was, "I don't think I've ever heard that before. Nobody has ever told me that they played El Shaddai on the flute." And I'm like, "Well, now you know. That's what I
It
played."
happened.
It happened. But
That's great.
it was one of those constant things where Karen just encouraged me. You know, she was like, "You can do this. You can memorize music." I played some crazy songs. I played Via Dolorosa by Patty. Oh, what is her last name? Patty. You know Patty. Played that. I played some really hard musically challenging songs and I had to
Uh-huh.
memorize them. And I would have never done that if it wasn't for Karen's influence. She
Hmm.
also had me in every single play that the church did. She was like, "You can do this." Just the encouragement, just the,
Hmm.
seeing me for more than what my circumstances were, right? She
Yes.
saw in me more than the home that I came from, the environment I lived in, the school that I went to, how I dressed. She really just saw me as one of God's kids.
Mark and Maria.
Yes, Mark and Maria. Mark and Maria, such an interesting story. And obviously, they actually both stood up in our wedding, super great friends.
Wow.
But I remember being invited to their home. So every Friday night when I was a teenager in my high school years, they had what they called hang night. They're about 10 years older than me. And I was like, "Hang night, what is that?" Now, I have pretty long hair. Mark had longer hair than I do right now. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, you were like, "I'm not hanging around those people." Wait, I was like, those are not people that I hang around with. I had a friend of mine, Dustin, invite me to hang night, like, come and do hang night with us. And I was like, I don't hang around people like that. And I have eaten those words for the past 30 plus years because they became some of the most precious people that I knew. I finally decided to step out of my comfort zone and go to hang night one night. And what I found in their home were teenagers everywhere sharing Jesus. Mark had a heavy rock Christian band that he played music in his basement. I don't know what his neighbors thought of them at this point, right? But all that I know is how much they loved every single kid that came into their doors. They knew everybody by name. You know, there was always snacks and food and music. It is where I began to see my husband more regularly. So it was where, like, I walked in and there were kids just everywhere in pockets, and they were all happy and getting along. And every week outside of Friday nights, on Tuesday nights, they did a Bible study where, you know, their living room was, you know, you could barely find a seat. They were just loving on teens and showing them the right way to live for Jesus. Like, you didn't have to be out partying. You didn't have to be out doing drugs. You could come and just be and hang out with other kids and just be loved on.
You mentioned that this was where you first were able to spend more time with your now husband, Eric. What
Yes.
about Eric and ultimately his family too?
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting. When I was at Mark and Maria's, their daughter Felicia loved Eric. She was mesmerized. And Eric, she was 5, and Eric was her boyfriend. My husband was her boyfriend. And when I came into the picture, Felicia was so upset until we asked her to be our flower girl. And
Oh,
I got to visit with Felicia several years ago. She's come and stayed in my home. And what's so cool, and this is just how God works, right? She always says, God brought me my own Eric. So her husband's name is Eric.
no.
No lie, right? She's like, God brought me my own Eric. Like, you got to keep Eric, but God brought me my own Eric. But it was just so sweet, just even watching how Mark and Maria's kids, like, accepted me, you know, loved on Eric and I, and just became ingrained into our life, even till today. Like, I am still in contact with them. Maria passed away several years ago, and we were able to go back for her celebration of life in 2020. And that is where I saw the family that took me to church. So we had been removed from that community for 20 plus years. And I was able to see the family that brought me to church, and I was able to walk up to them and tell them thank you. To just say, I mean, like, thank you, because I don't think people realize when we are planting seeds in other people's lives, sometimes where their lives end up, right? And it was just such a beautiful moment because I was able to say, thank you for not only changing the trajectory of my life, like, you've changed the trajectory of generational lives. You know, you've changed the generation of my kids, you've changed their kids' lives, all because of you picking up a little girl that was from a really broken home 3 times a week to bring to church. And it was one of the most beautiful moments I'll ever remember.
Very powerful. So then what about Eric's family? Because they were definitely in the picture here.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. Eric's family started coming to our church. I was still in high school. Our friend Dustin is who ultimately kind of set us up. And Eric was just a constant, right? He was just a friend. We hung out. We were in youth group together. His brother was going to ask me out. I'm glad Eric did first. I could tease with my brother-in-law and tell him that today, like, I love my brother-in-law. We probably would have not been a great pair. Eric and I are great, you know? So, but his dad told him one day from the pew, this was back when we had pews in churches, right? He told him from the pew, if you don't ask her out, you're missing out. And Eric asked me out on my 18th birthday, and his family has been another constant in my life. His family loved me. His family took me in at 18. Shortly after my 18th birthday, 2 months later, my mom kicked me out of our home. She was in the middle of she was high that night, and her and I had gotten into an argument, and she asked me to leave and not come back. And I didn't have anywhere else to go. My sister was away at college. My dad was in the middle of a divorce and I didn't really have anywhere to go. So I was like, I'm either going to stay in my $500 car that I bought. I was really proud of that $500 car, by the way. Bought it with my own money, but I did not want to sleep in it, right? So I was like, I'm either going to sleep in my car tonight or I'm going to end up at my boyfriend's house. And I ended up at Eric's house and his parents took me in. They cleared out a bedroom for me. And for 2.5 years, while I finished an associate's degree at the local college, dated Eric. We went to bed every single night, went to our own bedrooms. But his family showed me what a family was like, right? Mm-hmm. Having dinner together, hanging out, playing games together, going, out and doing fun, silly things together, having those traditions that I never really had growing up. As much as my mom tried, the traditions just are harder for a single parent.
Yeah.
So that's what they showed me. I mean, I remember getting to their house with clothes that I wouldn't put any child in today. It was like, but my turtleneck was fine, but everything below it was ripped. Right? The sides of a turtleneck shirt would have been ripped out. They just weren't great clothes. And Eric's mom threw them all out and took me shopping and just said, we're going to get you some new clothes. And it wasn't even about the clothes. It was more about being seen and somebody saying, like, you are worth more than that holy turtleneck.
Yes.
But the holy turtleneck was all I knew. And it was really hard to get rid of.
Sure. Well, I know you mentioned planting seeds in people's lives and how we do that sometimes and are never aware of what happened, what the impact that makes in people's lives. What would you say about paying attention to those opportunities to plant seeds or be there for other people that we're given throughout our lives, but a lot of times we're just not aware. We're not looking, we're not aware.
Yeah, I think it's being in relationship and being in community is so important. We have to show up for our people and our people, show up for us. But I don't think it's not a tit for tat, right? It is like we are called to show up because of what Jesus has done for us. So when we see a need and it's somebody that we know, we are, I feel commanded that I am here to help and support. But I also look at the kids that come to church. That maybe are in a tough spot just like I was. It's sitting with them. It's knowing them by name. And sometimes we aren't going to see where those seeds end up, right? It's talking to your neighbor, as they're going through something difficult or hard. It's checking on them, knowing that they might be going through a rough patch. So I think it's just so much more about community than it is about being just an individualistic, right? So many of us look at our own lives and we're busy and we have things to do and we forget that there's a whole other world out there of people that we're in community with that might be going through hard times. Sometimes it's something as easy as a text or a phone call, or maybe it's even stopping by. Even in today's age, we can still stop by and pop in on people. I was just having a conversation with my daughter the other day and she said, don't you remember when we used to pop in on friends? Like, I miss that. And I was like, oh, we still do that, And sometimes that's all it takes is us just popping in and letting people know that they're seen and loved and letting kids that are in our midst know that they're important. I have a teenage girl that we go to church with that I meet every couple of months. We go for milkshakes and fries. Like, it's nothing spectacular. I started taking her out when she was 12. She's 16 now. And at 12-year-olds don't drink coffee yet. So I was like, what are we going to do? So we go for milkshakes and fries. And sometimes we just have to be intentional. We have to look at the people that are around us. And we have to say sometimes they are more important than I am.
Yeah. Well said. Well, we've been talking about the very positive side of making an impact in lives, but there is a flip side of that, the destructive words and actions that sometimes we plant very carelessly, and they are often seared into the psyches of others. Sometimes I think that coaches and teachers, they don't realize how powerful their words can be and the potential impact they have. It could just be a throwaway comment, but we don't ever forget it. And I know there were some instances for you where that was true. Can you share the example of the black sheep comment that you
Oh,
obviously
yes.
have never forgotten.
Yes, our memories, as much as we try to forget them, don't forget them, right?
Hmm.
We can overcome them, but they're still
Yes.
seared. So my sister and I both took Italian in high school. Why we took Italian? I mean, outside of it being our heritage, I was never going to become fluent in Italian, but we both took Italian. And my sister was a amazing student. She was a very hard student to follow. She was a straight A student. I was not. And we were walking in one night for parent teacher conferences, and we were walking into our Italian class. Mr. D was his name. And as we're walking in, my mom and my sister were walking ahead of me, and the teacher commented to my mom, "Oh, where's the black sheep of the family?" You know, that's how he said it. "Where's the black sheep of the family?" And I just remember walking in behind them being like, "Well, here I am. I am here."
Oh.
And really, what it does and what people don't realize is how it impacts how you are moving forward, right? I never
Mhm.
excelled in Italian. I never felt like he was in my corner. So, why would I want to do good at something when he didn't see the good in me? You
Mhm.
know, I remember a cross country coach once telling me that, complaining because I could run all during cross country and I did great until we had a race. And then at the race, I'd come in one of the very last people and they were like, "You're better than that." Or like, "Come on, can you not do better than that?" Right. And I just
Mhm.
remember going to the very last race of that year and I came in fifth place. And it was because I was like, I'm going to prove myself, right? I'm going to prove that I can do this. And sometimes that happens. And then sometimes it happens where you're like, I'm not going to keep working. I had
Yes.
an algebra teacher ask me why I wasn't as smart as my sister was.
Mm.
And I failed algebra that year. I had to take algebra again my sophomore year, but with a different teacher because he did not believe in me. He didn't see
Mm.
me for who I was. I was never going to be a mathematician, you know. But the second year I took algebra with a different teacher, I got A's.
Mm.
And it's so interesting how
It
we
is.
as individuals have that impact on other people.
Yes, it sure is. I know, I don't know how old you were, but at some point you said you were convinced that you were a failure. And I don't know if it was caused by comments like these, but it sounded like you had accepted it in your own mind. Why do you think we do that? Why do you think we end up accepting
Yeah, I think
declarations like that?
when we are told that the bulk of our lives, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough. I can't tell you how many years I tried out for cheerleading. I never was a cheerleader, just over and over and over again, I failed. But what I didn't have was somebody in the background saying, "Okay, maybe that's not what you're great at. Let's find what you're great at." I didn't have anybody vying for me. I didn't
Mhm.
have anybody saying, "It's okay if you're not a cheerleader. Not everybody can be cheerleaders," right? Maybe you're going to be the best flautist, which I
Yeah.
was, right?
Uh-huh.
But I didn't have people in my life or my parents that were edging me and encouraging me to say, "It's okay if you're not good at that. You're going to be good at something else." But I think like we don't realize how powerful our words are. And they are powerful for the good and they can be powerful for the bad.
Yes. And yet, I thought it was interesting because shortly after that self declaration, you began to show amazing determination. You said things like, "Something was ignited in me, a quiet desperation to rise above the rules others assigned to me and to write a different story for myself." Here's another one. "Every setback, every lie, every no show, every broken promise made me more determined." How do you think you went from believing you are a failure to that level of determination?
I think that I felt like I had to prove myself. It's not always a great place to be, right? But I think I finally got to the point where I was like, I don't want to be who they say I am. I want to be better. I want to do better. And it has to be a mind shift to some degree. But it's also like, man, I'm going to push myself and believe in myself, even though inside I really don't believe that I'm going to do it. right? I remember starting in sales really early on in my early 20s, and they had announced a free trip. And I remember coming home that night and saying to my husband, we're going to go on this free trip. And he was like, that sounds really hard. And I was like, oh, mark my words, we will be in the Bahamas. And we were in the Bahamas. Now, I will also say this. Sometimes that determination isn't always great because what I learned through it was I sacrificed a lot because I was too stubborn at times. I wanted to determine my self-worth instead of finding my worth in Christ. And I felt that the harder I worked, the more that I produced, the more people would love me and the more that I would be seen, forgetting that I'm already seen. Like God put all these people in my life to see me because he loved me. And through the years, I've had to go back to that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made by him, and he sees me, and I am only good enough, and I can only perform for one person, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. I cannot perform for man. I cannot do it for anybody else but him. And I think sometimes even having that mind shift, because I was young and I was like, I'm determined and I'm going to prove myself. And I think now I've just gotten to the point where like, I don't have to do that. God has proven that I am worthy. I don't have to prove. He died on the cross for each one of us. So we do not have to prove our worth. But society looks at it that way, which is sometimes sad, right?
Yeah. Stacey, this story is largely about the relationship with your mother. And I know you make the statement, and this was probably in a time of distance. It doesn't sound like you all were ever truly estranged from each other. I know you made a lot of effort to make that not happen. But you made the statement, there was still a part of me that longed for a relationship with my mom. I know we've talked about foster kids and how they can be in a really good place with loving adult figures, and yet still they have this longing. It's like that mother relationship is like a magnet to them. They just
So important.
can't, it's like it's irreplaceable. Why do you think that relationship is one like that?
I think having family acceptance is huge. I think, we are birthed in our mother's womb. We are created. We hear their voice. We are one of them for so long. There's just this natural pull that happens back to a bio family. And even though my mom kicked me out at 18 and life was not easy, I still wanted her approval. I wanted her to be proud of who I was. I wanted her to know that she was a good mom, that she did a good job raising me to the best of her ability. And there were several years that like we did not talk regularly. I would invite her to things and she wouldn't come, or I'd invite her to things and she'd come with a chip on her shoulder, but I knew that it was my job to continue to do the inviting and to continue to keep that door open, whether she walked through it or not. And it took many, many years of repairing and visiting and phone calls that were awkward, that I got off the phone thinking, what am I doing? Why am I even making this effort? But God, right?
Yeah.
He always kept that just lit in me, that she was still my mom. And when I became a mom, I realized, oh my goodness, my mom did the best that she could. With the resources and information she had, she did the best. And our best is not always great, right?
Yeah.
I was the same way as a mom, right? I always did the best I could with information and resources I had. And there are times where I've looked back and been like, why did I do that? What was I thinking? And I'm sure that there were times that my mom looked back at that. But there was always an approval that I longed for from her.
Okay. Hey, friends, we are going to take a pause here and we'll be back next week to hear about exactly what that restoration in Stacey and her mother's relationship looked like and why hope is possible for you if you are in a relationship requiring restoration. Next week's episode is packed with wisdom and insights that you don't want to miss. Until then, I'll leave you with some words from the Gospel Coalition. Sin may do real and regular damage to our relationships, but our love for Christ and each other means we continually seek repair. I love you guys. Go out and make it a great day.